He's editor-in-chief of Breitbart News and a New York Times best-selling author. And on this podcast, he brings deep research, prescient analysis, and world-class guests. He's Alex Marlow, and this is the Alex Marlow Show.
All right, big show today. We're going to talk to Peter Schweizer about H1Bs, about affordability, and about his research into the Clintons and whether or not we could finally see some accountability for some of the crooks in that family. And then we got something special for you. We'll give you some tools for how to talk to friends and family members over the holiday season. I can't wait for the holidays. I feel like it's needed this year. It's been kind of a tough year for a lot of reasons. I think some of you can do the math on some of the things I'm thinking of. Happy to see it wind down with some fun and family and celebrations, but it's sometimes hard to speak to those who you don't agree with politically. Maybe it's tough for you, maybe it's tough for them, or both, but we're going to give you some tools with a really important interview with some top researchers in the field, and all that is something that I'm really excited about. But first, I want to tell you about how right now in Ukraine, elderly Jews are trapped in unbearable poverty. Galina is a 96-year-old Holocaust survivor who has spent her entire life in the same village. She's sick, alone, and facing another bitterly cold winter. Today, like every day, she must decide whether to spend what little money she has on food, medication, or heating. No one should have to live like this, but for Galina and so many others, this is a harsh reality. The Bible tells us that when you bless elderly Jews living in poverty like Galina, you'll receive blessings in return. Through the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews and your generous donation, you can bring hope to those in need. Your gift of just $25 will provide a food box packed full of life-saving essentials that will help feed an elderly Jew struggling to survive. Don't delay. Your gift today will help provide the life-saving food and hope that Galina and many like her so desperately need. You can visit urgentifcj.org. That's one word, urgentifcj.org, or call now at 866-338-IFCJ. That's 866-338-4325. Important cause. A lot of important cause on the show. Don't forget, also go to preborn.com/Marlow. Make that donation. Try to save a life this holiday season. And call sign Courage on Salem Now. We got a lot of great partners who are with the show right now. And we want them happy because they do good stuff. All right, let's get into it with Peter Schweizer. All right, Peter Schweizer is here, and it's good timing because I tend to like to have Peter when I'm just trying to get a friendly guest in who I know will be knowledgeable, but all the topics that are on my mind this week are essential to Peter's beat. He's the president of the Government Accountability Institute. He is one of the top researchers in the world. He's written many best-selling books, many of them #1 best-selling books, and is a senior contributor for us at Breitbart News. The Drill Down podcast is his terrific podcast. The latest episode is on a nation of renters, and I love this topic, Peter, because affordability is the word of the month, and I could be the word of next year. That could be the big word of 2026. And I am waving a flag here. I'm trying to get people's attention, flap my arms up and down. It is not enough just to complain about Democrats, and we should absolutely complain about Democrats, but we need to frame this issue up and provide solutions for Americans, because it does feel like that both sides are completely lost on the issue of making the world more affordable. And I feel like the default could be to blame the party in power, and that's Republicans. So let's start there. What do you guys mean by a nation of renters?
Well, I think there's a couple of things here at work. One is you have basic increase in the cost of living in America, and it's not just the recent inflation. The problem with housing costs have been rising much higher than inflation, much higher than incomes. I recounted that in the early 90s, I bought a condo in suburban Virginia, in McLean, Virginia. I paid $105,000 for it. I was working for a nonprofit. I made 1/3 of the cost of that condo. Think of any major city in America. Could you, based on what the average person is making, purchase something that's 3 times the cost of their annual income? No way. So this has been a long-term trend, and there are a number of factors contributing to it, but a lot of it has to do with the massive regulations that have been imposed over the years, whether it's energy efficiency, whether it's land use restrictions, whether it's zoning fees and costs. And the numbers are so bad that it is believed believed that in the city of San Francisco, regulations are adding $400,000 to the cost of a home construction. The rest of the country, it's $200,000 in most cases. So it's a huge problem, and I really do think this was a key component of why Trump won in 2024. Yes, there was all the cultural stuff, the trans athletes. Yes, there was the issue of the abuse of power. Yes, there was the issue of the cover-up Joe Biden. But I think the core issue for a lot of voters, especially swing voters, was this affordability issue. And what the administration's been doing so far, it's kind of underwhelming. I'm sorry, proposing a 50-year mortgage is not helpful.
It's exemplary foreign policy, same as the first administration. I love the stuff on the border. I love the stuff on crime. And I think the tariffs have worked out brilliantly, which is hilarious and wonderful at the same time. But though inflation has come down, things have not gotten more affordable. Some of this, I think, is the fault of the Fed. I think there's a lot of blame to go around. A lot of it is inheriting the Biden inflation. So I think there's a lot of blame that can be, most of the blame goes to other people, not the people in charge. But I'm not confident voters will see it that way come a midterm election, especially as Republicans increasingly become the party of low propensity voters, which I think is kind of cool in a lot of ways. Peter, we could flesh it out on a different show. But overall, we need to be very wary that new parts of our coalition might not show up unless we convince them their lives are getting better because we're in charge.
Well, and to your point, it's also a question of what is the messaging out of the Trump administration. Trump has basically been saying, no, you can buy this, this Thanksgiving kit at Walmart cheaper than you could a couple of years ago. It's a different kit. It's smaller. I mean, the point is, don't try to argue with what people are experiencing. Yes, the rate of inflation has come down dramatically from the Biden administration, but that doesn't mean prices are dropping. It means that the increase has slightly decreased. That's right. So it's still going up, and there have been some notable successes in energy. But my point is, don't argue with people's experience and say, no, you're wrong, you're ignorant, you don't know what you're talking about. When they're looking at the grocery bill and they're looking at the utility bill, explain to them what you're doing to actually try to fix and solve that problem. That's what needs to be done, and they really have not been doing that at this point. They're just trying to swim against the tide, which I think is a dumb idea.
So when you talk about the nation of renters concept, I think this is really fascinating that we've created this cultural phenomenon that we just borrow and we don't own. And I think we're getting slowly conditioned to the World Economic Forum version of the world. And I don't want us to be participants in this.
Yeah, no, but this is, I think, an important point, and this is not a conspiracy theory in the sense that there's this big cabal trying to do it. This is actually a mode of economic and political thinking that you are better off having people that don't actually own their own homes, who don't even necessarily own their own cars, that are a renter society because, number one, it helps with environmental concerns, right? They're concerned about climate change. People are going to consume less if they're renting and not owning their home. But also, frankly, what's the flip side of that? It makes them easier to control. I mean, one of the biggest assets that people are going to have is the home that they own. So that gives you a sense of financial independence. If you've got a boss that is asking you to do something you don't agree with, you can quit your job if you know you've got equity in your home, you've got this financial position that will help you get through a difficult time. If you're making rent payments every time, if you're making a car payment, you don't own your car, it's easier for powerful people in your life, whether it's politicians or business executives or whoever, to control your life. So it makes you less independent, which I think is terrible for individuals and it's terrible for our country.
Yeah, that's so well stated. That was really, really nice. All right, Peter, let me talk to you about solutions. What do we do to get out of this?
Well, I think one of the things we need to do, and here's the challenge, because a lot of this happens at the state and local level, is we've got to aggressively pursue deregulation on some things related to housing. Look, I'm not saying let people build whatever they want, wherever they want. You have to have some zoning rules. But to give you an example, the big push for electrification in the Biden administration, they didn't want people using natural gas in their homes. That alone was believed to add about $20,000 to the construction of a home because you have to use different materials to make it electric rather than gas. So there are a series of regulations like that you can do. The other thing you can do is I think really hammer people at the state and local level that when they put on these restrictions for building new homes, this is really an elitist position. And here's the reality. If you live in a nice neighborhood, I'm thankful to live in a nice neighborhood. It's not a hugely expensive one, but a nice neighborhood. Every homeowner there is kind of incentivized to not see more construction. Because if there's more demand and less supply, the price of your house is going to go up.
Yeah.
The problem is it's devastating for people like my kids who are in their 20s who would like to at some point purchase a new home. The average age of a new home purchaser today is 40 years old. That is not healthy for our country. So we've got to deregulate. We've got to aggressively do so. That's not something Trump can just do with an executive order. It's something you have to push aggressively on. I do think interest rates need to come down. John Carney at Breitbart, of course, is the key guy on that. He has dissected that, the case for it. And I think we need to think of other incentives to encourage home ownership. This is a cornerstone of the American dream, the desire to own your own home, which kind of makes us unique even from the rest of the world. I've got family in Europe. I know people in advanced countries around the world. Home ownership is still something that, by and large, in terms of the way we do it in the United States, is unique. The ability to buy a home when you're young. It's fading away, and it's something that used to be unique to the United States. And so I think we need to do a series of things in that area.
You also put an explanation as something I noticed. I checked the Zestimate on my house recently, which I'm not obsessed with this stuff. I know a lot of people wind down with Zillow, and it hadn't gone up as much as I thought. And they're actually building a lot in my neighborhood. And even though my house is probably a little bit nicer than the new housing development, but there's just more quantity, and that does have a downward effect on some of the new, but this is something there's another affordability issue, and this is a really complicated one. I want to do a whole show with you on this down the road, but we're not talking about healthcare too. And this is another one where the Democrats outmessage Republicans, even though they're horrific on it, which is insane because think about part of the reason why things are so unaffordable is the Affordable Care Act, where healthcare costs have gone up every single year without fail since the Affordable Care Act. And yet we're still somehow losing the messaging war on this.
Yeah. First of all, you were supposed to be able to keep your doctor, right? That was supposed to happen. And your
insurance. I lost my insurance twice, 2 times. They kicked me off. I went on the exchanges. I bought, and they kicked me off again.
Yeah. So they lied about the choice that you were going to have, and then they lied about the affordability part. This year, even with the subsidies, the Obamacare premiums are going to go up 17%. That's the estimate. So it's not working. The problem is Republicans have not been good about, you can't beat something with nothing.
Yes.
And there are some great ideas out there. They've just not made it a priority. And so I think that's what I'd like to see on Capitol Hill. Look, I appreciate all the stuff that is being done in terms of investigation and looking at FBI misconduct, and that's all important. That's not going to win midterm elections. That's not going to win in 2028. What's going to win is this issue of affordability. And they should be focused on 2 things. Now that they did the tax deal, right? They did the tax reform, which was, I think, vital. And they're doing the energy, which I think is vital. They've got to do something related to housing, and they've got to do something related to healthcare. And there's some very, very good ideas out there. There's just not the political will. And look, it's complicated. It's not easy. It's easier to go on, cable news and riff about, Crossfire Hurricane or something like that, which, again, I have no problem with doing. But that's not a bread and butter issue that's going to help you with swing voters and provide you with a winning political coalition. This
is so interesting because I got a negative comment on my YouTube about how I'm being too dismissive of the Fed's conspiracy on J6. And let me just state for the record, I absolutely think the FBI egged on J6, and then I think they over-prosecuted all the people who were there. I think it's all a big disgrace and a national embarrassment. That said, I don't think we're picking up a single extra voter by going down that rabbit hole. And that's why I call it the rabbit hole. And feel free. If you're an online person, you're extremely online and that's your thing. I'm not telling you, it's a better use of your time to do the J6 rabbit hole than watch Netflix, like for sure. So do that. But for me, I'm not dwelling on it because I tend to think of things. What are people who might sit out the next election, or what are people who are good, decent Americans who have not been reached by people like you and me, Peter? How do we bring them over? And I don't think it's the J6 pipe bomb stuff. That said, I'm sure there's a lot that we can do on it, and other people are out there doing that. They can do that work, and I applaud them. But I am trying to think about healthcare costs, housing costs, inflation. We get this stuff right, we win in a cakewalk in 2026, 2028, et cetera. And if we don't, then we get President Newsom, President Mamdani. I guess he's a Ugandan, but who knows? They'll change the Constitution. They'll figure it out.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. I mean, this is the bottom line. You get a lot of clicks, you get a lot of attention on social media talking about the pipe bomb J6. And yes, that needs to be investigated. But the people that are watching those are already voting. They've already made up their mind. They're already part of the coalition. I'm talking about the swing voter, the average person out there that on Friday night is watching Netflix. They're not doom scrolling on X. They're not watching Fox News. Those are the people that made the difference for Donald Trump in 2024. They're the ones that made the difference in 2016. And you need to win them and continue to win them, because these are voters that have been burned. They're cynical. They've heard this before. Some of them were Obama voters before. They thought Barack Obama was going to fix things. He didn't. They got cynical. They walked away. Donald Trump has done it. So you've got to continue to win them over, and not win them over by giving them gifts and giving them money, but really actually making their life better. And you can do that by getting the government out of the way in areas like housing, encouraging construction, and by reforming healthcare in a way that doesn't help insurance companies. Yeah, you've got to have institutions that are making money and are profitable, but it should be based on the consumer. And we have not had that. That's not what Obamacare was, and the Republicans have not made an effort to push this forward, and that's something they need to desperately do.
Yeah, I don't want to open up a can of worms. So I want to change gears, but part of it, the Republican establishment tried to do this with Paul Ryan, and they failed. And I'm not saying that Paul Ryan's plan was horrible. It was just we couldn't sell the public on it. And even with Trump as president, we wasted a bunch of political capital trying to push that across. And just don't forget how Paul Ryan haunts us all. And it haunts our dreams. All right, Peter. So I want to ask you about H1Bs, and just as a frame up, you've worked with us for Breitbart for many years, but you're not a bomb thrower. You never have been. I feel like you speak to all sides, not just as of the conservative movement. I think you're trying to reach everyone, but I'm curious your thoughts. The H1B program is failing, and now it seems like all of a sudden the Trump administration likes it, and I'm alarmed by this. But maybe this is an opportunity for a hard reset. What is your take on the program in general and the latest language coming out of the Trump administration that now we're going to be importing a bunch of people again?
Yeah, it's another great example of a government program that might have been well-intentioned initially. I don't know the complete legislative history of it, but it's been massively abused. And, you have people like Palmer Luckey in Silicon Valley talking about how it's manipulated. The challenge is, do we have shortages in certain STEM areas? Yes, we do. A couple months ago, I saw a study, software engineering, for example, we have a shortfall. There are a lot of places we don't have a shortfall, chemical engineering, mechanical engineering. So there is a legitimate need in certain select cases, perhaps, to bring in skilled workers that can add value. The problem is corporations look at this and say, well, this is a way we can save labor costs, because we can bring in somebody from the developing world who will be happy to be paid 60% what an American would for this job. We can save money, and we can wrap it around the mantle of what H1B was originally designed to do, which was to fix real problems. So I think you need to, and Trump has flirted with this, and I think it's a good idea. We need to think of ways to radically revamp the program. I'm not one who says no STEM, employees at all from the rest of the world. I think that probably is going to create some problems, but you've got to make it a more expensive program to participate in. So when Trump talked about raising the cost of participating in the program, that may be one way to do it, because it comes down to, on a visa application, you're trusting the employer in this particular case to be honest in why they need the worker, and you're trusting the worker to be honest in their skill set. And I don't know how you test those things, but what you can do is to say, look, this should be the exception, not the rule.
Right.
You may need a couple of H1B engineers. You don't need 450 because you're trying to, as a company, save labor costs.
Save
and
money.
That abuse is absolutely happening.
Yeah, and this is what's been interesting for me is that, Breitbart over the years, we've skillfully employed the tactic of taking out an extreme flank in order to move the Overton window. We've done this effectively for over a decade, decade and a half of doing this tactic. And I haven't been doing it as much lately because I feel like a lot of people use that tactic now, so it's sort of less original. But I will say I'm very tempted here just to be just a flat out no more H1Bs, and just even if we're not being entirely literal, but just take that approach, just because it was so disheartening to see where, Kristi Noem, who is not, this is not her response. This is not part of her portfolio in immigration, but her saying we're going to bring in people with the best intentions. A lot of people have good intentions who want to be here. I've got a bunch of children, Peter, who I want to be able to go get jobs, and they'll have enough competition with other Americans. I don't need to import a bunch of competition for them who are willing to do the same job for less after I've spent my whole life working to pay into the system that's created this environment, and then we don't get any benefit at all. In fact, we're in a worse position in some cases because of the nature of things.
Yeah, and Alex, this is H1B is kind of a cheap way to get out of the STEM dilemma. The fact that we have too many young people that are studying, comparative religions at universities rather than studying the hard sciences, and that's a problem overall. This actually makes it worse because it kind of feeds that addiction that we have to the non-sciences in education, and it helps our universities maintain these bloated departments that really don't benefit us a whole lot while not focusing on STEM. So it will continue to compound the problem if our society decides, and by society I mean our business leaders, our education leaders, that, hey, it's okay if we can't get people to study these things, it's okay because we can just import them. It's an easy cop-out, and no, that should not be allowed to happen.
So what do you think is there a simple fix to you to this? Is there an easy answer?
I don't think there's an easy answer, and I'm not an expert in the visa program. What I would say, though, is it's very easy to participate in H-1B. It's very easy to put your requests in. I think there should be a higher cost, a higher price if you want to bring somebody in. Increase the fee, because then that's going to change the financial calculation. I think the numbers that are allowed in should be dramatically reduced as well. I'm probably not a person who's at zero, because I can envision a circumstance where you have, American high-tech companies that maybe need 36 software engineers that are in a very specialized field that can't find them. So I don't want to say zero, but it should be certainly a lot less than it is. And there should be a higher cost for participation, because that will hopefully deter these companies from doing it for just totally economic reasons.
All right. So last one for today, Peter. This is something that you do know a lot about. We are seeing reports from Chuck Grassley's office that the Clinton Foundation was really trying to do pay for play, where they're soliciting both from U.S. and foreign actors, basically money for influence. What do we know about the new revelations? And I know this confirms a lot of your research over the years, where I think that was really where you became a household name, was with your Clinton research. I mean, you've done many great things before then, but I think people became really aware of what you were capable of investigating the Clintons with Clinton Cash 10 years ago. What did we learn that's new, and how do you feel from your perspective?
Well, it's certainly very encouraging. Look, Clinton Cash came out in 2015, and we know after the book came out, the FBI launched a series of investigations. There were 5 field offices looking into these pay-to-play allegations, and those investigations were basically snuffed out by the main building at FBI. Jim Comey basically killed those investigations. What is being released now, I think thanks primarily to Kash Patel, but also to Pam Bondi, are documents based on those FBI investigations. In other words, what did the FBI find? I was talking to the FBI at the time. We were sharing what we knew. They didn't share a whole lot about what they knew, but I certainly knew, based on the questions they were asking me, that they had pulled on some threads and had found some very direct instances where foreign governments and foreign oligarchs were getting pay to play. They were making, large $10 million contributions to the Clinton Foundation. This is at a time when Hillary Clinton was the Secretary of State. So she was doing favors in return at the same time. So I haven't seen all the documents. These are coming out in different tranches. But it seems to be very clear that the FBI was, in fact, establishing, based on what Grassley has said, established that this, in fact, was going on. The Clintons were doing it. And Jim Comey, instead of letting the investigation follow its course, basically killed it in its crib, or at least as a teenager, and then said, you know what, instead, we should probably investigate this stuff involving Russia collusion and Donald Trump, because those two things, that pivot essentially happened in 2016 and 2017. So it's an example of how in the world of intelligence, they talk about politicized intelligence, how it gets manipulated by, intelligence analysts to serve a political purpose, what they're seeing. This is politicized law enforcement. It's basically saying these field offices in the FBI started these organic investigations. They found some really interesting stuff, but because of the person who was at the center of it, namely Hillary Clinton, we're going to kill it, and we're going to take those resources and instead start investigating her political opponent. So I find it very encouraging, but also troubling.
So what do you think along these, what do we have to look forward to? Do you feel like this is going to be the first in a lot of revelations? Do you feel like there'll ever be accountability for the Clintons, or have they just proven that they just dodge everything and they're just Teflon?
Yeah, I think the challenge is that the statute of limitations in terms of prosecution has run out on a lot of these crimes. They tend to be 7, 10, 11 years. A lot of these happen in the first part of the Obama administration. So there's probably not a lot that can be done in terms of prosecution. I do think that their reputations have been severely damaged and are not going to be resurrected. People now associate pay to play with the Clintons, and rightfully so. This will further confirm it. But I also hope that it leads to some reform at the FBI. I mean, if you have an organic investigation going on in 5 field offices and they are pursuing it, nobody asked them to do it. They got tips. They looked around and found stuff. The notion that the main headquarters of the FBI can just kill it is a major problem. So there needs to be FBI reform as well. But those who are hoping that Hillary Clinton's going to be paraded around in an orange jumpsuit, that's not going to happen, at least as I think related to the Clinton corruption. The statute of limitations have run their course, unfortunately.
Peter Schweizer, wonderful stuff. The Government Accountability Institute, GAI, the Drill Down podcast, which none of you should miss. I don't think I miss an episode. I think I get them all. And what else can we plug? Breitbart, senior contributor, all of your books. What's the latest book?
I've got a book coming out in January. I can't talk about it now, but I would love to come back and talk about it when it is released.
Wonderful. Oh, my goodness. That is so exciting. Can't wait for that. That is just a content bonanza for us at Breitbart and the Marlow Show. All right. Thanks, Peter, for being here, and I really appreciate you and all the great work you do. And we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, Alex.
All right. You guys all know that what I try to do is provide arguments for all of you to take to your family members and friends, because I really do think that's where change happens. I think change happens by speaking to one another. And when we speak to one another, I think that that's what grows a movement. I don't think that a lot of the hectoring and yelling that you get on cable news actually convinces a lot of people. But I still think it's okay that those things exist because it gives you arguments. But then you have to deliver those arguments to friends and family. And you want to do it in a way that's loving and preserves relationships, and it doesn't create lots of stress and strife around the holidays. And I got a couple of people who are experts in this regard. We got Doug Teschner is here, and Beth Malow, not Marlow. And they've dedicated substantial amounts of research to this. They have a book out called Beyond the Politics of Contempt, Practical Steps to Build Positive Relationships in Divided Times. And they also have a Substack, Together Across Differences, that all of you should check out. And I think this is just essential right now because guys, I feel like people are burning out on the divisiveness in politics. I think everyone would like to get back to where we can agree to disagree. But it's been so long in America where it feels like we're getting more tribal. And I feel like I'm finally starting to feel some energy towards people getting over it and wish we could just get back to agreeing to disagree. But yet then you see certain things, like Jimmy Kimmel's wife was out last week saying that she can't look people in the eye who like Trump. And maybe we're going backwards still. So first of all, let's just go back in time a little bit. And whichever one of you wants to start, feel free. But when did this start? When it felt like it was so difficult for us to just have a conversation and agree to disagree and just to be comfortable family members afterwards?
Well, I'll jump in on that. And I was in the legislature and state legislature mostly back in the 1990s. And I actually gave a speech in 1998. I talked about declining civility and that this house was a sacred space. We're referring to the House chamber. And as I look back on it now, when I found that old speech, it seems like a much nicer times. I mean, it's really, things have really gotten a lot worse. And of course, we want to respect people to disagree. People should disagree. This is what democracy is all about.
That's right.
Let's fight it out on policy. But when it comes to dehumanizing people, this is a really dark period.
The dehumanizing is so big. We talked about this on yesterday's show. Is that why do you feel like everyone wants to dehumanize one another? It's not enough just to beat them. I always felt like, we have T-ball games, and my children's team was not very good this season. And then you shake hands and you congratulate the other team. Last season, my children's team won every game. We would shake hands and congratulate the other team. Why is it that now it feels like we can't just win a debate? We have to do a dance on our opponents' faces also.
Well, I think what's going on a lot is what we see in the media, not all media, but social media and some of the big media and even foreign governments, I think, are intervening. And there's a term we use in the book from Amanda Ripley called conflict entrepreneurs that kind of stirs things up. And people feel like they have to feed into that, or they're on their phones and they have to just get into that and they get sucked into it. And it's very inciting. And it's like an us versus them mentality that people are getting into. And that's what we're trying to break out in the book.
I'd add.
Please add.
Yeah, about the social media algorithms are so, they play to people's fears and they play to people's worst assumptions. It'd be one thing if social media was sort of advocating for different positions, but they send you down the rabbit holes, and it's designed to get you to be upset and fearful, and so that they see more ads, and then a lot of people now are exploiting it, like Beth said, these conflict entrepreneurs and even foreign governments. I mean, there was a case and a cited case where people were going at each other in a public square, and it was all done by the Russians or the Chinese government. There was no one even organized it. So this is where we all got to really step back and take a look at this and really try to distinguish how we disagree and disagree in a respectful way.
Before we get into approaches, I can't help but dive into social media because I feel like that's where it's coming from. I feel like people are much more personable in personal life than in social media. But I do feel like the social media is dragging us towards, I think, some of those tendencies manifesting in person. I mean, not as widespread. Social media seems just to be a place to rage at people anonymously for the most part. But it does seem like in our personal lives, there is an effect. Can you speak to that phenomenon? Maybe Beth, start with you.
Yeah. Well, I'm a sleep doctor. I'm a neurology sleep doctor. And I'm constantly telling people to get off their phones, particularly at bedtime, because they end up doom scrolling, right? And it's just, they can't sleep because they're so revved up, as Doug was saying, from the clicks and what they're seeing. And it makes it seem like like the entire world or the entire country is at each other's throats. And it's actually not that way at all. Where, we refer to the exhausted majority in the book, that most of us are not on that level of extremism or fringism, which is on both the left and the right. And most of us just want to get along and be able to talk to our relatives at Thanksgiving and all. So, yeah, I think the social media really does, and the algorithms really do incite us. And it leads to not being able to sleep. It leads to anger, increased blood pressure. It's not good for our health or mental health.
Yeah, well, I'm going to talk about this term, the exhausted majority. This was a study that was done called the Hidden Tribes Report, and it said that people on the extremes are driving the agenda, and it's an us versus them kind of mentality. But there's a lot, according to this study, I mean, there's more people and it's not that they don't have political views. It's just that they don't want to have this dehumanizing approach.
Dehumanizing.
Thank you. And people want something better, but it's all on the extremes. And I have a one quote in the book. I said, if it screams, it streams, but if it's kind, pay no mind. And this is the way the social media works, and this is the way a lot of the traditional media is working now. So, and somehow we've equated differences of opinion on politics into really looking down at people. Some people, I'm talking especially people on the left more, they can't even have a conversation with somebody. They're not open to having a conversation with somebody. Why? Why can't you listen to someone's point of view? And we've sort of got ourselves in boxes and we're making a lot of assumptions about people. And this is very dangerous.
Do you feel like there's one side of the political aisle that is less inclined to traverse politics and be able to just communicate peaceably with the other side?
Well, what I've seen is there's differences of opinion on both sides. Certainly I even being more left-leaning, I would call myself moderate and maybe a toe in the left. I do feel that at times we're revved up. And again, I think social media algorithms have a lot to do with that. What I've seen on the right is a lot of retreating. When I want to have conversations with some of my conservative friends, there's a sense of feeling like being ambushed almost and saying, I'm just going to steer away from talking with people on the left. And then the people on the left don't want to talk to the people on the right. So I would say there's both sides are struggling right now with how to relate to each other and to realize that, like you said earlier, Alex, when we're all human beings, and when we have that conversation one-on-one and we take it off of social media, we find we have a lot in common.
I see people. Well, I see people, on your own side, if you're willing to sort of say to someone on your side, well, maybe that person's not so bad, or maybe I'll talk to that other person, and you can get ostracized. People are staying in their own lane. A lot of the pressure is coming from people on their own side who are afraid to that if they don't stay in their lane, they're going to get alienated and isolated.
So for me, observationally, just in my life, the people on the left are just clearly less inclined to talk to people on the right. I from my personal sample size, first of all, tracking news at Breitbart, it seems like consistently the headlines are that people on the left don't want their conservative friends at their holidays. And just personally for me, family members, the ones that will warn me not to talk about politics at the holiday functions are always the left-leaning ones. And I want to try to understand why that is. And I do think both sides are guilty of this to some degree, especially over the last couple of years, maybe since the pandemic. But I'm trying to understand, and Beth, maybe you can help me if you consider yourself slightly left-leaning. Why do you think that is, because I grew up being kind of taught that liberals are more open-minded. And now it does feel like, at least to a small degree, I would say a moderate degree, but at least a small degree, I would say they're more closed-minded at this point.
Well, I have to agree that I'm seeing it on both sides. I don't know that it's more on the left than more on the right, but I'm definitely seeing it on both sides. And as someone who leans left, I've certainly had that situation where it's easier for me to talk with somebody on the right who's a conservative than it is, let's say, someone who's a progressive. I think what is driving a lot of people is fear right now, because liberals or people who are on the left are not in power, right? Not in Congress, not in presidency, Supreme Court issues. I think that there's a lot of fear, and then the social media and the social media algorithms rev up that fear. So one of the things I try to do with my group is say, hey, you know what? Talk to your conservative friends at Thanksgiving or your relatives, and realize they're human beings, and try to break through that, and don't feel like, you're on a higher moral imperative or whatever to not talk to people. Try to really be curious about someone. And I think what helps is you don't have to agree with someone. Like, you could still say, like, as a doctor, I really care about healthcare in this country. I really care about vaccines, right? The childhood vaccines, those kinds of issues. I can still stand my ground on those issues, and yet do it in a way, as Doug said, that isn't demonizing the other side. And that's what we try to teach in Braver Angels. And we're trying to get the message across in our book, that you can have this like courageous citizenship, that you can disagree and yet do it in a civil way. And that's something I really try to teach my friends on the left.
Go ahead, Doug.
It's curious to me, or one of you talked about the trends, but when did family become more important? I mean, when did politics become more important than family? Yeah. We used to be. Our identities have been tied up in lots of different ways, in hobbies and geography and where we work. And yet somehow politics, we have sort of risen to the top in terms of how we define people. And I mean, this is really a concern. For instance, we've seen, there's been data about how when 30 years ago, when if you had a child and they married someone from the other political party, no one cared. Right. But nowadays, people really do care, and it's really kind of a concern that why are we so tied up in our political identities? And then
but hold on, let's answer that question, because that's my answer. If the roles were reversed, and Beth, even though I'm not an expert, but I'm very observant on this stuff. If Beth had asked me what the difference is I feel like people on the left are slightly more wrapped up in their political identity. I think people on the right are very much in line with their political identity, but they also think about their faith, they think about their family, sometimes even their career first. I do find that the phenomenon that I observe is that the left does feel like their number one identifying factor is their political identity. You can see it the way some of these late night talk show hosts have been talking about how they don't even view their job as to make people laugh anymore. They think their job is to tell people how to interpret the news, which is just, that would have seemed insane 20 years ago. Yeah. And now it doesn't. We're just like, oh yeah, of course.
Yeah. Alex,
yeah, please.
If I could, I just want to push back a little bit. I think what I try to do is avoid putting people in boxes, right? So the same way that there's very many different shades of conservatives, there's many different shades of liberalism and people who maybe lean left, right? Like, I'm much more moderate. And I think that it's important to keep that in mind for your viewers. In other words, my biggest thing is, as a liberal, is the free speech and the ability. What's more important to me is, regardless of what side you're on, being able to say, I really value you for your differences. Like, I value you for, like, you and I probably would be diametrically opposed on a variety of things. Maybe we wouldn't be. I think there's probably some things like healthcare that we would agree on, listening to your show and all. But I do think that we would agree that we could disagree in a way that would make America stronger. And we would have the same values about making America stronger, America better. And I think I try to avoid putting people in boxes. I try to avoid putting all conservatives in boxes. And I would just say to your audience and to you, like, try to do that if you could with us as well, right? Not everybody on the left is the same. We don't all agree on the same things, right? We don't all have the same feeling. And I don't want to be like, okay, I'm on the left, so I'm anti-gun, I'm pro-abortion, I like the idea of like, I can be my own person.
But I think this is essential because I do feel like, for the purpose of the show, it's a national show and I'm trying to reach a national or international audience. I have to group people for the sake of conversation, but the caveat always applies that people are individuals, and I love that. And you should always approach people with the best intentions. Just don't come into the conversation assuming the worst. Assume the best in people, and I think that's a great footing to start off of. And assume that if you do disagree, they're going to be open-minded to your viewpoint. And then if they prove otherwise, if they're rude to you, then I think that you have the moral high ground at a minimum. I mean, you'd rather not have to deal with that, but if you do, at least you're the one with the moral high ground. Doug, I want you to react to that too, and then I want to get to solutions, which is really where I wanted to go today. But
well, I've just been thinking about, one of the things we really talk about in our book is about looking at your values and what are your values are really important to you, and then comparing a little bit those values with maybe how you think about people on the other political side, because it all starts with kindness and warmth. And we focus a lot on dignity and respect, treating other people with dignity and respect, even if you totally disagree with them. This is really kind of fundamental to our thinking. And we find if we really get people in a room, and we have Brave Angel workshops where we've got big fairly partisan viewpoints, and you really talk to people about their values, we find that people have a lot more in common than they realize. It's just somehow, the social media has been feeding them. Don't talk to them, and making assumptions about people. And this is hard work. This is not easy. Stand up for what you believe, but also do it in a kind and respectful way.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, good. So let's talk solutions. And again, let me make sure I remind people of the book, which I'll put in the show notes. Beyond the Politics of Contempt, Practical Steps to Build Positive Relationships in Divided Times. And you guys also have a Substack that people get together across differences. Doug Teschner and Beth Malow. Let's talk about solutions and some recommendations. And you guys can really take the ball here wherever you want to take it. And tell us what you could pose a scenario, broader recommendations, whatever you want to do that's essential, you think, for the audience.
Well, I'll jump in and follow up on what Doug, I'll jump in and follow up on what Doug said about the values. I think the values are really critical and really understanding that. And then what I think you want to do is, and we try to do this through our stories. Like I talk about how I befriended people who voted for Trump in when I lived in Nashville, Tennessee, and how I realized that we had a lot in common. And we did things like singing, like I sang in a chorus, and it was very politically diverse. And I think that when you do things with other people, whether it's just singing or playing a sport or doing some community project, it really brings people together and you go beyond party. Like you can't criticize someone who feels differently than you and is if you're their friend, right? And you've worked with them on something. And then the other thing that's related to that are these one-on-one conversations. And we teach this in Braver Angels. I teach this as a moderator. It's the ability to like take things off of social media and have a one-on-one conversation. Like, again, Alex, if you and I were to have a one-on-one conversation, I think we'd find that we have a lot in common, and people are less apt to be mean and rude and uncivil if they realize they're looking at
Absolutely
the person
right.
face to face. So I really support that. We talk about that in the book. We also talk about being critical thinkers, meaning like when I was driving to work in Nashville, I would have, you'll probably get a kick out of this. I would have Breitbart, Patriot
Nice.
Channel on one, Bush button, and I would have MSNBC on the other, and then I would have POTUS in the middle. And I literally went back and forth between the channels whenever there was something going on in the news, which always something going on in the news, because I really wanted to hear both sides. And there's shows like there's Tangle and All Sides and various other media outlets that give you, this is what the right is thinking, this is what the left is thinking, this is what the middle is thinking, and it gives you the opportunity to think for yourself. And that's what I think we have to do. So those are my quick practical
I think that's
tips.
really great, and I
just
fully recommend. And my audience knows this. I say it so often: is that you don't just read my content. I think my content's the best, but go get the other content too, and then you get the perspective. Doug, jump in.
Well, I think people are looking for hope. I mean, this is what I think we want to give first and foremost in our book. And we give people steps, like a hopeful roadmap for Americans who are trying to make sense of this dark moment. I mean, these are pretty challenging times in our country. And we want to try to transform the politics of fear and contempt into the politics of hope. But so we look at it in different levels. I mean, we talk a lot about relationships and how you skill levels to have conversations, that you can have these difficult conversations and feel good about it. If you approach it from the heart, and then we have very specific skills in terms of how to do that. We're also trying to help people with their mental health. People are so stressed right now about the country, and give people a little hope that, okay, I can do little things that can just make my life better. And we also talked about communities and how you can work in your communities on citizen-led solutions. And there's some wonderful examples with Braver Angels of how people can get together to try to solve a community problem in a respectful way. And so much of this is getting to know people on the other side. We're so siloed now, and in our politics a lot of times, both geographically and also even with so many friends on social media, but they all think like me, or there's a lot of that. And then we also got into political activism. We were invited to a group called Indivisible and Rise for Freedom and Public Citizen, and they were going to have a big anti-Trump message, training, and they invited us to come and talking to people on the other side. And 700 people showed up on a Zoom call. I was a little leery of the whole thing, but one thing we really took away from that is, of course you should protest. Of course you should stand up for your belief, but you can do it in a way that's respectful of people on the other side. And, you might actually convince them, or at least, create a bigger movement by showing people that you respect them. And if you do that, you'll have a chance of at least getting them to listen to your point of view. So be an activist.
Yeah,
but a bilge builder.
We like to say that until somebody feels heard, they're not going to hear you. If you feel like they're deplorable, or they get the impression that you think you're on a higher moral ground, they're not going to listen to you. They're not going to work with you. So I truly believe that, I was very impressed. I was at a No Kings rally, and actually I was exhibiting books at the same time as a No Kings rally, and everybody came over afterward, and I was thinking, oh no. But, I was so impressed that people wanted to figure out how to get along with their sister at Thanksgiving or Christmas or Hanukkah. And I was just so impressed that people, even the most avid advocates and activists, really found that the message of our book resonated with them. That made me feel really good. So I do believe there is something about combining activism and what we're calling now courageous
All right. Well,
citizenship.
last one for now. I want both of you guys to give me a couple of specific recommendations for people that you think will help them out. Doug, you can go first.
Well, I mean, I started with the values, and I mentioned that, but, bring a little curiosity, bring a little humility, bring listening skills. We listen, Stephen Covey wrote the famous book, but we listen to understand as opposed to a reply. And we give you a lot of very specific ideas, and we tell stories that are even a little embarrassing for us, but how you can apply these things, and how you can feel better and more hopeful about your lives, and how we can really, it's possible. We can get along. We've had an amazing country for 250 years, but we can't take it for granted. I mean, if you go to Rome and you see all the times of the Roman Empire, and you think, well, eventually the Roman Empire fell, but I sure hope we're not going to fall in the next 250 years, that we can do it, we can get along, we can find ways. We're not all going to agree about politics, but we can find ways to be kind and respectful to one another.
Beth.
Yeah. And I would just add, my two things. One is don't be afraid to reach out to other people. They're probably not going to bite you, and you may be surprised. You may learn something in the process. Be prepared to change your mind on an issue. I've certainly leaned much more from the left to the middle on, let's say, elective abortions, although I continue to feel very strongly about medically appropriate abortions, being a doctor. And for me, it's been important to realize that I can speak my mind, I can say my truth, and I can do it in a way that not only is respectful, but because I'm listening to the other person and really making sure they feel heard, I can be impactful. And sometimes their mind may change, or they at least won't send that inciting tweet after they've talked to me. We have huge power as citizens to make a difference. So I would just say, keep your mind open, be curious, not furious, regardless of which side
So, but
you're
Beth,
on.
what if you feel like you're the one who's open-minded and your family members are not? How do we drag them? Because a lot of this, I think a lot of the wisdom you have is how to improve ourselves, which is great and that's essential. But what do you do if you feel like you're really open-minded and you're feeling that the other family members or family member are closed-minded?
Yeah.
Great question.
What we teach.
But both of you can answer. I want to hear from both of you.
When we teach,
go ahead.
Yeah, we both answer. Yeah, when we teach in Braver Angels, and I really learned to embrace as a moderator and a teacher, facilitator, is that sometimes you have to be the one in the room, right? This is a ground rule. Sometimes you have to be the one in the room who's a little bit more with it, or sane. I guess sane is the word I'm looking for. So you have to kind of rise above the craziness and say, I'm gonna approach you with respect. I'm not gonna dig down into the dirt. I'm gonna lift you up. And it's surprising, but when you do that and you model that for people, they oftentimes rise to the occasion and surprise you with their civility. So I would say, you be the adult in the room if you see everybody around you acting crazy. Go ahead, Doug.
Well, I couldn't have said that better, except just to add the last thought we had in our book is about, reaching out to someone on the other side, inviting them for coffee, ask them about their family, ask them about their upbringing, ask them about their hobbies, and ask them about how they came to their political views. And you can share the same when you show that you really care and you're really listening. And we describe that as changing the country to people at a time.
Perfect place to wind up for today. And we can do this again, guys, if you'd like. Because I am definitely always take the approach, ask more questions than give opinions. And that really, you really find a lot of common ground with people, and you really open them up to your ideas if you start with that approach. All right, guys, beyond the politics of contempt, practical steps to build positive relationships in divided times. Doug Teschner, Beth Malow, you guys are very cool for coming on the show, and I appreciate you, and best of luck with the book and the Substack and everything else.